Hello everyone, my name is Monica. Thank you for joining us. Today we have Rachel Wright with us. She is certified Jira administrator and author of Strategy Admin Workbook. She is expert in the Atlassian products and she is going to explain about the best practices for managing and maintaining your Jira application. I think this topic is super beneficial as it will help you to reduce your Jira mesh. Now, I am going to hand over this webinar to Rachel right now. Hi, Rachel. It's over to you now.
Hi, Monica. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks.
It's great to be here. Good evening or good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're coming from. I wanted to say hi on my video, but it doesn't seem to be starting, so I'm waving to you from a distance. I'm coming to you today from Florida in the United States, and we travel full time, so I'm on the road in my recreational vehicle that we tow behind our truck, and we travel for the last 5 years this way. So it's interesting, but it's nice to be able to get on a Zoom every now and then when the bandwidth holds up. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Give me 1 second. And can somebody let me know when you can see my PowerPoint? I have to check the chat to see, but I assume that since there's chats, you can see. All right. Okay. Well, let's get to it then. You all already know that if you don't maintain your Jira application, that it's going to quickly grow out of control. Mine was an absolute mess when I first started, but I want to help you make yours less of a mess or keep it from becoming a mess in the first place. So in our presentation today, I'm going to show you how to set some standards so you don't have more schemes to maintain than are actually necessary, and show you how to clean up the schemes and custom fields that you have when you've got too many, how to archive old projects and unneeded issues so they're out of your way, and then also how to track changes and customization requests so you have a record and an audit trail. Okay, so first, a warning. This presentation contains swearing, a lot of swearing. In fact, I'm going to swear 10 times, but if you swear along with me, your Jira instance will be better tomorrow than it is today. All right, so here's the first swear. I will avoid unnecessary customization configurations. And if you're like me, you probably already have too many schemes and way too many customizations. So before you can clean these up, you've really got to understand what you already have so you can stop the bleeding and prevent more unnecessary modification. All right, sounds easy, right? But how do you do that? So it's all about creating standards, crafting usable policies to support the procedures you have at your organization, and then utilizing project templates. So let's discuss each one. So whether you've just started or you've been using Jira for many, many years, this is a very powerful application, and I don't believe that it should be directed by a single person. I really think that you'll want to have a governance or a steering committee that can establish standards, policies, and look after the application as a whole. So I've listed just a few duties of an advisory board, and of course you'll need to define your own. But my favorite here is that you'll defend and protect application health and future. That's really what this board's main focus is, to help you retain what you have and stop it from becoming a bigger mess. Okay, so who should be on this board? My recommendations listed, but the worst person to have on your board is someone who really only cares about their Jira project or some special feature that they need. We all have those people in our organization that don't really care about Jira, they just want this plugin or they want this app. So don't be afraid to say no to those people and to replace any board member who really isn't considering the long-term health of the entire application or if they're negatively impacting your mission. So these board members, they do not need to have admin permissions. So think about that. Keep the admin group small, but have a robust board that can help you make decisions. All right, so here's a start to an advisory board. But now what does the board do? The board needs to create specific policies to ensure application health. So I recommend that you have a written policy for customization, application security, protecting or preventing the sharing of sensitive information, and then any specific regulations for your country or industry. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the customization policy. And I think this is one of the most important policies to have in place. Sometimes you've got to say no to a request. We've all had to do it, right? But this policy will help you say no and help you explain to this person why. So what element should be in a good customization policy? I've listed some of my ideas. Add your own depending on how your organization works. But you can also download my customization policy worksheet. This will help you craft your own. And the worksheet's free if you already have my book, the Jira Strategy Admin Workbook. All right, so next is application security. And this policy usually includes what you can and can't do with all company applications, and it should include Jira. But let's be honest, when's the last time you reviewed your organization's policy? Probably not since you joined the company, right? So I recommend posting the parts that are relevant to Jira with your other Jira documentation so you can remind users. All right, so your advisory board should determine what sensitive information is permitted in your Jira application. Now, your policy is going to depend on whether your application is subject to compliance standards, how access to sensitive data is controlled, other company information security policies, other things like your industry and the laws in your country, whether you accept credit card payments, and a host of all other factors. But my recommendation, it's easiest just to not enter sensitive information into Jira if you can help it. And this data is sometimes referred to PII or SPI, and it includes stuff like passwords, personal data like social security numbers and mother's maiden names, health information like which health insurance plan an employee has, employment information like citizen status or salary, and then other proprietary and confidential personal or company information. And another example of sensitive information is asset details. So like a list of server IP addresses. So if you put this data in Jira and it gets into the wrong hands, this information could be exploited. So I like to just never put this in Jira in the first place. I worked with one company who wanted Jira to be their employee management system. And I talked to them about how important that data was and that that information really belongs in a protected database, and I wouldn't couple it with your daily to-do list. So that's just my advice. And then finally, you might have other specific policies if your application is subject to like specific compliance requirements. And here are just some of the common ones. Okay, so let's talk about project templates. So Jira comes loaded with default schemes to get you started. But before you start building custom schemes, I would decide how many that you're going to support. I suggest that you start out with 3. I would have one set of schemes for development type projects, one for support, and one for task-based projects. And let's use a development template as an example. So here's what that might look like. You might have an issue type scheme that has epic, story, bug, task, subtask. And the screens might have dev-specific fields. Some of them that are commonly used are fix version, FX version, story, points, sprints. And the bug issue type might have a special workflow and some specific fields like steps to reproduce and expected result. So that's a really common dev configuration. There's really no need to have 15 different setups for different dev teams and different Jira projects. So I would document all these settings so the team knows what each template that you build contains, and then start the team off with a template until they have a real business need for a custom configuration. Every team seems to think their project needs to be very, very custom and specific, and a lot of times there's really no business benefit to that. It makes your life harder as a Jira administrator. So templates are good. All right. The next best practice is around change management. So this starts with a way to record your changes and then communicate them to your fellow admins and also your users. So think about where you track changes today. Hopefully it's not in Post-it notes or in email or nowhere at all. But I realize sometimes that's how you start, and that's okay. But I recommend you create a Jira project to support all the applications at your company, or at least a project to support the Atlassian apps. So I have some screenshot examples of what that looks like in my application. And of course, you could also add a Jira request form to your help center if you have Jira Service Desk that's on the right. But either way, the easiest place to track Jira changes is in Jira. And this works perfectly fine, except when Jira is unavailable for maintenance. So if you have Jira Server, keep that in mind that your Jira data might not be available to you during an upgrade. All right, so what types of changes should be tracked? I get asked this all the time. My personal rule is that I document the changes that only application or system admins can make. The other stuff I don't bother with. So I don't bother documenting like a new component or a project level admin permission. But I would track installing a new add-on, creating a new permission scheme, setting up a new incoming mail handler. That's stuff that only admins can do, and that's the stuff that I think is worth tracking. So why bother? It sounds like a lot of busy work, right? I know. And of course, Jira's got an audit log, but that audit log, if you've looked at it, it provides very little detail. It tells you what changes were made and the timestamps, but what it doesn't tell you is why you made that change, who requested it, and then other important details about the change. So sometimes you need to make a change that's temporary or a change that you know is not the best idea. It's not great for the application in the future, but you need to make it for now. And it's really important to have that why documentation. Also think about your application in 5 years. Who's going to come in and support the application and try to understand why you made all the changes that you made? So you're helping your future admins, and then you're also creating a way to look back and understand why a setting is the way it is. And then of course with Jira, you know there are multiple ways to achieve the same thing, and some ways are better than others. So your documentation will help explain how you made that change and the factors that influence that decision. So a quick good thing to know, Atlassian has a free version of their Jira Cloud product now, but the free version doesn't include the audit log function. So if you're on that free version, you especially need to document your changes. All right, so it's shocking, but so many of the companies I work with don't have test environments. And I didn't have one either when I first started out, so I get it, I understand. But I saw really quickly how important it was to be able to experiment and learn without impacting production data. So you need a real place to import just a small amount of your data to see how your changes are going to work with those real life scenarios. So in this screenshot example, I've used a couple different methods to help identify that this is a test environment, so I know I'm not in production. So I changed the look and feel settings. I made them green, and that's different than the color in production. And I added an announcement banner at the top, and then I changed the instance's display name to Jira Dev. So also the URL is going to be different. I usually change my avatar icon, so it's different when I log in. And then some organizations also change the application logo on the top left. Do anything you need to do so you're sure you're not in production when you're testing your changes. I've definitely made a change in production by mistake, thinking I was in a lower environment, so try not to make my mistake. All right, a couple tips for your test environment. I always disable email in the test environment so I don't notify end users with duplicate or test data. And then I only turn email on when I'm testing something email specific. And then if you have Jira Server, I recommend that you give your application admin team read-only access to the Jira database. The reason is if they understand how the data is structured, it's going to solve a lot of mysteries and make them better admins. And then they'll also have the ability to access additional data that's not available in the admin UI. And this is really helpful for troubleshooting and understanding the scope of your data. All right, so I've told you you need a test environment. If you don't have one, that's okay. There's lots of options. And I've listed my favorite options at the top of each list here. So for cloud, if you're using the Atlassian hosted environment, your company's not hosting it, you're having Atlassian do it for you. The easiest thing to do is to just get a second instance and pay the lowest license tier, which is $10 a month for 10 users. There's also that free version I mentioned earlier. It's just like the paid version, but it doesn't include permissions for projects or issues, and that won't be helpful for you testing those areas of Jira. Also, of course, doesn't have the audit log. Now, because I like to test permissions a lot, I think it's more important to have those features, and that's why I've listed the free version below the second instance idea. You can also get a 7-day free trial and extend it for an additional 30 days by contacting Atlassian support. Now, I don't think a 37-day trial is too helpful in the long run. I think you need a test instance available all times, but that will at least get you started. And then if you have no better option, at least create a test project in your production instance and make your changes there first. And then server customers, you've got a lot of options too. Really nice, you can get a free license for a development and testing instance. Have your technical contact log into my.atlassian.com and they can generate that license. And then of course you can also go the second instance route and pay the lowest license tier, and that's a $10 one-time payment for 10 users. And then there's also that 37-day trial. And then if you can't do any of those, create a test project in your production instance. So whatever you choose, just make sure you have a place to test your changes before you unleash them on your users. I've made a lot of mistakes and I've unleashed things too early, or things didn't go the way I expected them to. And if I had just tested them first in another environment, I could have saved myself all that pain. All right, so next tip is, in addition to your advisory board, I think you should select a list of ambassadors, which is a small group of Jira users that can help you share information, answer other users' questions, and kind of provide like tier 1 support to your users. So I would make this part of the project lead, project admin duties. So somebody comes to you and they want to be an admin of a project, guess what? You're part of the new ambassadors group. Anybody who's excited about Jira, enlist those power users to help you. All right, time for more swearing. Our next best practice is all about maintenance. So a maintenance strategy and proactive action is essential to a healthy application. You know, if you just let your application sit there, it rots, right? We all know this. So here are some things for you to determine. First, what regular maintenance actions are you going to perform? And then how often are you going to perform them? And then how are you going to communicate those maintenance activities to end users? The worst thing for an end user is to come into work the next day and find out that everything's different, right? So you definitely need a strategy for how you're going to share that information. So there's 23 things that I do either quarterly or biannually for my own Jira application. And those depend on the use of the instance, whether it's a test environment or production. But you can download my scheduled maintenance worksheet to help you identify some actions and then document your own plan. Okay, so this is a tip just for server users. There are 3 great tools to help you with your maintenance duties. The first one is the instance health check function, and it's part of the troubleshooting and support tools that come pre-bundled with Jira. And this helps you check for common problems with your file system, attachments, the index, the database, and lots of other good stuff. So in this screenshot, you can see that the check has detected a problem. So you can click on that problem to see additional details and clues to solve that issue. And then when you do have problems, Jira shows admins an on-screen message. You can control the frequency of those notifications by changing the settings on the right. Now, I like to turn it up as high as possible, which is the default, because I want to know everything going on in my Jira instance, but that's customizable. The next step is the integrity checker, and again, this is a server tool. And this checks a variety of issue, search, permission, and workflow problems. I really like to run the workflow tests after I've made some major workflow changes. The nice thing about the integrity checker is, while it takes a while to complete, you can exclude some of the tests if you're in a hurry when appropriate. So like I said, after I make a workflow change, I just run those workflow tests. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure the integrity checker is going to take about a half an hour and I go get some coffee. So as you can see in the screenshot, it did detect a problem. And you can either explore the issue and correct it on your own, or you can ask Jira to try to fix it for you. So I investigated this error, and this one, it turns out it's just a permission scheme problem. The permission scheme no longer existed in my Jira instance. So for this problem, I just let the integrity checker fix it. After it did, I reran this specific check again just to be sure everything was fine, and Jira did a perfect job. No issues after that. And then the last tool I wanted to mention is the Integrity Check for Jira app. It's from Botron Software, and you can get it in the Atlassian Marketplace. And I like this app because it helps you detect, locate, and fix errors in your filters, agile boards, and dashboards. So as you can see in the screenshot, I've got 91 instances of missing or duplicate settings. That's kind of a mess. But this tool is going to tell you exactly what's wrong and where to find the problem. There's no guessing or hunting around with some of the built-in tools. So in this example, there's a broken JQL filter. So the tool is going to tell me the name of the filter, the name of the filter's owner, the specific JQL, and also the name of the missing status field or selection. So it's really easy to either fix the filter myself, or I can ask the filter's owner to do it, or if they don't need the filter anymore, to remove it. All right, our next best practice, and my favorite, is cleanup. So periodically, we need to audit what we have and remove what we no longer need. So here's my archive checklist. And by the way, archive is in quotes because the only real archivability is in Jira Data Center. Server and cloud don't have real archive abilities. But even though we can't remove the data per se, taking issues out of the index, at least this is a step in the right direction. You know, we won't remove the information from the index, but we can at least remove it from view and get it out of user's way. So here's the things that I do. First, I prepend the word X and archived to a project's name. And then that means all the archive projects are going to be listed together alphabetically at the bottom of the list. And then I create a category and I call it X archived as well. And I move all the old projects into it. And then I change the project's icon to like a big scary red X or a lock or some image that signifies something's going on here. And then I use the project's description to add some kind of copy. Usually I write something like, project data is still available for legal and historical reasons, but no new issues can be created or edited. Go here to create new issues instead, something like that. And then I disable the ability to edit and transition issues. Sometimes I allow issues to be moved to another project for a small period of time, and then other times I just hide the project altogether. And then finally, I remove the notification scheme because it's no longer needed. So that's one way you can deal with data that's not needed, but you need to retain for legal and historical purposes. All right, so now that those unneeded projects are archived, in quotes, I go through all the admin areas and then see what I can remove. There are going to be unused and unneeded schemes and settings. So here's an easy example. This is the permission scheme admin page. And as you can see, the second scheme is used by no projects. So I can go ahead and delete that one. And then the third scheme was created by Jira when the service desk project was created. And you can tell this by how it's named. So what I would do with this, I would rename the scheme to represent its purpose instead of the name of the project using it. That's a much more generic way to work with your Jira schemes. And you want to share these schemes between similar projects. Don't create one per project. So once I've cleaned up these two schemes, right, I've removed one and renamed another. There's really nothing more to do on this admin page, but it's time to move on to different areas of the admin and look for schemes to remove or improve. Now, this is obviously a very manual and time-consuming process, so don't get overwhelmed. Just tackle one admin area at a time, and small changes make big results in the long run. All right, so here's a quick tip. It's often really useful to know the ID of a scheme or a setting. You can hover over one of the links in the Actions column to see the ID in your browser status bar. And you can click one of the links and you can see the ID in the address bar in the next page too. Either way works. In the second screenshot example, that scheme's unique ID is shown at the end of the URL. It's 10,200. And you can also get the ID from the Jira database if you have access. All right, so let's touch briefly on cleaning up custom fields. I have an entire course on this topic, so I'll just share my high-level checklist today. But first, I need to give a disclaimer. Don't just start deleting custom fields. You need information before you can make deletion decisions. And deleting a custom field can't be undone, and that custom field data cannot be recovered. So be careful when clicking that delete button or there will be real swearing at your organization. All right, so here's my method for reducing your custom field count. The first step is an audit. You've got to understand what you have right now and how much it differs from the default Jira field list. You can use my free worksheet to compare your application to a default installation. Then also figure out how many of your fields are standard and how many are custom. So there are a few ways to approach this audit. You can do a manual examination, or you can use an app from the Atlassian Marketplace to help. I've got a couple that you can use, and they're all listed on a slide at the end of the presentation, but they are Configuration Manager for Jira, Optimizer for Jira, Custom Field Manager for Jira, and Admin Tools for Jira. So these add-ons can help you tremendously with your research, but also think about only a human can determine the value of a specific field in your organization. So no matter what, you're going to have to do a little bit of manual work. All right, so now hopefully you have your list of all field names and types. So start researching and classifying each field. And then finally, look at that list and identify fields that you probably don't need anymore. Once you have a list of fields you don't think you need, decide if you need to retain the data in those fields or not. If you don't, take a database backup and then remove the field from the admin UI. Easy, easy. But if you do need to retain that data, also take a database backup and then move or append that data to a different field. So there are a few ways you can do that. You can move data with the workflow post function using a script, with import-export utilities, with the REST API, lots of options. There are also some apps that can help you. Again, these are listed at the end of the presentation, but some of them are JSU Automation Suite for Jira Workflows, Script Runner for Jira, and the Jira Command Line Interface, CLI. So when cleaning up your Jira instance, always go slow. I like to only change or delete one thing at a time so I can track the cause of any problems that arise. So I change one thing, I use Jira for a day, make sure no one else reports issues, make sure I don't see any issues, and then I keep removing schemes and fields. And then one thing that's really good to know about custom field removal is this is going to break filters for your users. So use the integrity check for Jira app that I talked about earlier to detect those problems and help users fix their filters. After you've completed your data migration and field deletions, it's a good idea to do a reindex. But reindexes can impact performance, so I always do them outside of peak use hours. And then after any cleanup activity, I always update the documentation and, of course, make sure I've logged my changes. And then add a custom field audit to your regular Jira maintenance schedule. You know, it's not something that you kind of do once and walk away. I kind of like to do it a couple times a year. And then also, if you resist the urge to create unneeded custom fields in the first place, you'll have less to clean up in the future. So a quick tip, whenever a new custom field is requested, always ask the user how they're going to report on that data. And if they're not, it's probably not a good argument for a custom field. Only create custom fields that will be queried. So while you're working on improving configuration settings, also look for ways to make your workflows more efficient. So instead of capturing every little step in your workflow, use the phase approach. So simply break up your process into phases that represent a collection of similar steps. And that way each phase represents a status in Jira, and all the small steps in the phase don't also need to be statuses. I've worked with 2 companies now that both had a 20-step or more workflow. And the first thing we did was break it up into logical pieces and try to make it into a 4 to 7-step workflow because their users were just clicking buttons arbitrarily and the statuses didn't mean anything when the workflow was so long. So try to avoid that. So for example, let's pretend your company is signing a partnership agreement with another company. So we can use this really short phased workflow that's shown, that's open, in review, in execution, and closed. So even though it's a really simple workflow, the legal is reflected in Jira. So for example, in the review phase, the legal team is reviewing the contract, they're researching legal topics, they're communicating with internal teams, and they're negotiating terms with the external company. And then in the next status, in execution, the CEO, he's finding his favorite signing pen, and both companies are trading paperwork, and the legal team's entering the final documents into their contracts database. But this phase approach is always more flexible than a super long workflow. And again, if you're not going to query for all issues in a certain status, that's a clue that that status might not be necessary or useful. All right, the final best practice is to deliberately train your admins, your project admins, power users, service desk agents, and of course your end users. So 3 things to focus on. Determine your training needs and timeline. Try to encourage adoption of Jira. And deliver information on an ongoing schedule. You know, training is not just kind of something you do once when you join the company and that's it. Users need regular new information for their role and really what they're most interested in. So I've got some examples for you. The first is for a brand new user, right? They probably just need the basics. Don't overwhelm the brand new user at the beginning. Just answer easy questions like, what is Jira? How do they use it? How do they access it? And then regular or occasional users, they just want info about sharing and organizing their data and creating filter subscriptions, linking issues, and logging time. Power users always want more, right? They want information about basic and advanced search, JQL, bulk changes, stuff like that. And then team leads, project managers, scrum masters, they want to know about boards, views, reports, dashboards. Service desk agents want to know about meeting SLAs and then how to use the additional JSD features to support their customers. And of course, application admins want information about configuration, performance, effective workflows, best practices, mistakes, and certification. So it's important to deliver the right level of information to the right kind of user at the right time. All right, here's the final swear. Say it with me. Above all, I will leave Jira in a healthier state than I inherited it. So you've probably heard of the Hippocratic Oath or the phrase, first do no harm. Well, the Hippocratic Oath is a list of ethical statements for doctors. But for us, we have the Jiracratic Oath. And think of it as the 10 Commandments for Jira. And we saw these statements throughout the presentation. So you can take the Jiracratic Oath at the URL shown and download your certificate. And this will look fabulous on your office wall. So here's that slide I mentioned with all the URLs, the apps, and the download links. I'll give you a minute to snap a photo or take a screenshot. And then finally, if you want to give me some feedback on what you liked or didn't like about this presentation, I'll enter you to win a digital copy of the Jira Strategy Admin Workbook. So thank you in advance for your comments. And I'd love to take any questions you have about good ways to manage or maintain your Jira application.
Hello, Rachel. My name is Maria Luisa. I'm a project manager and I collaborate with Monica on this project of WebGentle. So I'm going to ask you some questions from the public if you want.
Great.
We've got a couple of questions for you. So let's start with this one. How can we make our data safe and private considering we are in the education sector?
Well, I think first you need to define what even belongs in your Jira application, right? I see a lot of companies that, for example, they want to put their sensitive data in Jira, but they don't want their customers to see it. They don't want sometimes even their internal employees to see it. So I've seen customers either move that data somewhere else. I've seen customers have a separate Jira application, like just for the security team. And then of course, if you do want it all in the same Jira, you're willing to take that risk. You can certainly restrict access to specific Jira projects, and then you can, with a permission scheme, and then you can restrict access to specific issues in a Jira project with an issue security scheme.
Thank you, Rachel. So let's go with the next one. how to force already existing projects where each have different configuration to start using new templates.
Right. So that's more of a cultural question, right?
Yeah.
How do you get people to adopt your ideas and go along with your changes? So the first thing I would do is I would form that advisory board so it's not just you, the Jira administrator, saying, hey, we got to make all these changes, right? People don't like change. That's a known problem. But if you get some help and support from leadership at your company through this advisory board, the ideas are probably going to flow a little more easily. You might be able to give it to people a little bit better. And the next thing you can do is to document those templates and explain to the users what the benefits will be once they start using the templates. So for example, I've worked with one company where some teams called it bug and some teams called it defect. And there was no difference. It was just a terminology change. And when they had that, their users weren't able to query for all the information because they didn't know, should I use bug? Should I use defect? Should I use both? So it was very easy for them to convince them, hey, let's pick one and go with it as a company so your users can find your bugs. So that's the way I'd approach it.
Perfect. So next question, it's a bit long. In order to create standardization across company, I need to integrate developers who are running sprints on nextgen and then product managers with classic projects, of course. But then again, they handed over to developers. Additionally to this, there is still an incident management Kanban board. So we've got different projects. How do I make all of these work?
Okay, so let's back up and talk a little bit about what nextgen is in case it's a new term for anybody on the call. So in Jira Cloud only, you have two types of projects. You have classic projects, which are the software, business, and support projects that you know and love in Jira. And then you have this new concept of project called nextgen, next generation. These projects are schemeless. So that means they don't share settings with other Jira projects. They're totally standalone. And the default in Jira is to let any user create this kind of project. So for one, I would have your admin team decide, is that okay in your organization? Do you want any users to create their own projects anytime they want, or do you want to delegate that permission to maybe a specific group of power users? So that's the first part. The second part is Atlassian is still developing this technology. So they're still working on important parts of it. For example, when NextGen projects launched, I don't think they had subtasks. Now subtasks are there. The boards work differently than boards in classic projects I've seen. So there's going to be a little bit of a lag before all of the features that you expect from classic projects also exist in NextGen, but they're working on it. Okay, so I think to answer the spirit of the question, you can pull all this data together in one board. Matter of fact, I did it myself the other day. I pulled data from two NextGen projects into one board because I just wanted to see it all together. But I noticed there are some differences. So in a board with a classic project, you know how you get to show 3 fields on that board? You get to pick your 3 favorite. You can't do that with the fields in a NextGen project. So there are some pluses and minuses to using NextGen projects, and then there are also pluses and minuses to having both project types at the same time. So I think I would decide as an organization which direction you're going to go. Are you going to do all NextGen? Are you going to do all classic? Or are you going to do a little bit of both and stumble through it a little bit while things are being built? So long-winded opinion on NextGen.
Definitely, yes. So Rachel, let's go with another one. Can we make all these cleanings, like permissions, users, projects, workflows, automatically by script runner or Python API scripts? Absolutely.
There are lots of apps in the marketplace, including Script Runner, and then you can, of course, build your own with REST API. You can also do an automatic import with CSV if that's something you like to clean up issue data. Definitely, yes, you can automate this. I've also automated things with non-web software. Catalan, for example, a lot of teams use that to test their software. And I wrote some scripts in Catalan and then ran them against Jira. So that's something you can do too. You don't have to use like a specific Atlassian program to do your cleanup. But whatever you do, test it in a test environment first. Try to think about all the ways this can break. Try to think about all the different impacts. And then just be very careful and run those scripts outside of peak hours, and then be ready to fix something just in case you run it and you have unintended consequences.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Rachel. We've got another very interesting question. How to remove custom fields with the same name and that are used in many projects? How do you remove that? Like
Great. I see that a lot. I worked with one company that had 3 fields called assignee in addition to the Jira standard field called assignee.
Yes.
How does that happen? But it happens all the time, right? So the first thing you want to do is you want to understand how much data is in each of those fields. So usually I do a quick query on each of them and I see which is the most popular, and usually the most popular wins. I mean, if it's a standard field, the standard field wins. But if there are 4 custom fields all with the same name, pick the one that's got the most data, make that your go forward field that you'll keep around. And for the other fields, push that data into the go forward field and then get rid of those old unused fields. Keep in mind you will break your users' filters, anybody who's querying for a filter that you're going to delete. So just be ready to help them fix their filter.
Perfect. Then last one. So thank you for your time, Rachel.
Sure.
Apart from the apps you listed, are there any robust upcoming ones on the marketplace? How do we choose the best app suited for our challenge? That's a very good question, because in the market,
that's a fabulous question. Yeah, so there's so many options, right? So I have my own little process for vetting apps. It's in my book, but essentially I have a checklist of things I look for. How user-friendly is it? How many of my needs does it solve? How expensive is it? Do we expect to need it for the long term, or is it like a quick fix and we're not going to need it forever? How easy is it to access their support? Has anyone reported security problems, in the reviews, for example? So I do a thorough review of any app I'm looking for. I install them all in my test environment. I compare them all, and then I make a decision from there. And of course, developing it on your own is always an option. For me, I find that it's way more expensive, and someone has probably probably has the same problem I do, and they've probably already developed something. So I check the marketplace, and then I check outside the marketplace as well, and then I determine, is this something that I want to build custom or use somebody else's solution?
Perfect. Another question. We've got 3 more questions for you, Rachel.
Sure.
What rules should I follow when someone requests for not existing field or workflow, etc.? Just business justification, or there should be a whole procedure to stop people requesting for changes?
Well, so I don't think the problem is them requesting. I like it when they request, right? Because they have a problem and I can probably solve it. But sometimes what they've requested, like the implementation they've requested, is no good, right? So find a way to solve their problem doing the least amount of damage to your Jira application as possible. Yes, I would ask for business justification. Yes, I would have a process. It doesn't have to be a 20-step process, but a couple steps where you actually understand what the user needs, and then you come up with a good implementation, and then you run that implementation by your Jira advisory board that you've created, just so you can understand, is this, and talk through with your colleagues, is this a good idea? What will this mean in the future? A lot of times users want new custom fields, and what they really need, they just need a distinguisher. They need a way to find their stuff. And you don't have to use a custom field for that. You could use a label. You could use all sorts of different other implementation methods. So try to resist every customization request, but I do think you should accept them and try to help users find ways to solve their problems.
Exactly. Another one, what's the best way to archive the old issues in Jira Server?
So cloud and server don't have a real concept of archiving. Data center does, but I don't think it even takes the issues out of the index, even in data center. I'll have to check that, but I think that's true. So what you can really do is hide that data. Now, it is possible, of course, to delete it from Jira. I don't think I would ever go that route, right? I'd rather just on what's important. But the key is going to be the permission scheme, right? Change that browse permission to a group of read-only or viewers. And then also don't let new issues be created in projects that you're not monitoring. And I also try to either move issues that are still important to a project that's going to stick around for a while, or we just have users create new issues if it's a really important issue and they are really going to work it after we've archived a project.
Perfect. Another question for you. While considering for documentation, is there any plugin for documenting the existing objects and its value? Like a list of custom fields and its values, workflow and its conditions, validators and post-function and so on?
Yeah, definitely. There are definitely marketplace apps that will help you with that job. If you have database access with Jira Server, it's really simple. You just run a quick little query and you've got that documentation. One thing that's really helpful is I'd like to publish a list of the custom fields and their values for the users. So next time they come to me and they say they want a custom field, I ask them to look through the list and say, hey, which of these looks like what you're asking me for? That's a really easy way to try to stop the creation of new unused custom fields. But yes, there are definitely apps that will help you document that. And then for workflows, one easy thing you can do is export them as XML. And, you know, I'm not the best person at reading XML, but even I can understand what it means. And then you can document from there too.
Good. Another one. What rules should I follow when someone requests for not, sorry. What's the best way to limit access to certain admin sections or subsections, like certain behaviors or certain notification scheme for a Jira instance where there are a lot of different unlinked or unsynced admins?
So the admin team's not communicating is kind of, I think, where you're going. So in server, there are two levels of admins. There's the server admin, and then there's the application admin, system level admin and the application level admin. And by default, these two permissions are grouped. So if you have server, you could potentially give a different set of users the keys to the castle and then give the admin users less abilities. In cloud, it's all the same level, and there's no way, at least not without a third-party solution, there's no way to restrict what an application admin can do. You just need to communicate well, train people well, have your own internal policies. And if you're documenting your changes, it's pretty easy to see who did what, and if they're doing things in a way that is really not beneficial for your organization, you can pull them aside and try to explain how you'd like it done instead.
Perfect. So Rachel, so far we have replied to all of the questions. So if there is any other questions from the public, we are here to answer.
Yeah, Maria, I think we have covered all the questions now.
Yes.
Yeah. And I would like to say a big thanks to Rachel to give us a time for today. Thank you, Rachel.
Yes, thank you for having me. I hope this gives you all some idea of one thing you can go back and improve in your Jira instance, because one thing will make a big difference.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining the webinar today. And I hope we will meet again in our next webinar where we will represent another great topic with the great speaker. Thank you all, and thank you so much, Rachel, for your time again. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel.
Have a great day.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.